On the evening of August 27, 2000, a call came into the Berdsk City Police Department. The officer heard a disturbed male voice reporting that in Microdistrict A, House 50, in a birch grove, the body of a young woman with no signs of life had been found. Law enforcement officers, dog handlers, forensic experts, as well as the head of the police department and representatives of the prosecutor's office immediately went to the crime scene. Such urgency was unusual for a quiet Saturday evening in a provincial Siberian town, but the situation demanded it. The examination of the crime scene and the victim's body indicated that investigators were not looking for a random offender, but for a murderer obsessed with a perverse sexual fantasy. The young woman's body had been found by a local resident who had planned to go fishing that morning and had gone to the birch grove between the houses the previous evening to collect worms. The body lay only a few meters from the path. The woman, about 20 years old, was almost naked. Next to her lay her blouse, which the perpetrator had removed. No other belongings were found. The attacker had taken the victim's personal items together with her handbag. The victim's identity was established surprisingly quickly. Among the crowd gathered near the crime scene was Vladimir Frolohol, who had been searching for his girlfriend Svetlana Menina for a day. When the young woman's body was carried away on a stretcher, the man recognized his partner. Frolohol told police officers that he and his girlfriend lived at number 50. On August 26th, the couple had visited Vladimir's relatives, where around 8 p.m. they had an argument, and the young woman had walked home alone. Investigators wondered how Svetlana had ended up in the forest, a place locals usually avoided late at night. However, that night, the young woman had decided to take exactly that route. The search of the houses near the crime scene continued well after midnight and yielded no results. None of the residents had seen or heard anything. A detailed conversation with the victim's boyfriend revealed that, in addition to her clothing, the deceased Svetlana had been carrying a handbag, silver jewelry, and a watch. Forensic experts determined that Svetlana had died almost a day before her discovery. This meant she had been killed about half an hour after saying goodbye to her boyfriend. After the rape, the victim was strangled. Investigators concluded that the young woman had been lured into the forest either by an attractive young man or by someone she knew, since she had not attempted to escape or call for help. The victim simply had no time to resist. It was decided to investigate the victim's closest acquaintance, her boyfriend Vladimir. Investigators were interested in the details of their quarrel at a relative's house. Immediately after the argument, Svetlana went home alone, and Vladimir also left the party. At the time of the crime, he had no solid alibi. Theoretically, Vladimir could have caught up with his girlfriend and continued the argument, which escalated into violence and murder out of jealousy or revenge. Investigators developed a reliable method to verify this version. At that time, the laboratory results were already available. In addition to mechanical asphyxiation, experts determined the perpetrator's blood type from the semen sample, which did not match Vladimir's. Therefore, the young man was cleared of suspicion. Investigators checked all relatives, friends, and acquaintances they could locate for possible involvement in the death, but without success. The investigators concluded that the murderer was a stranger after all. After re-examining the crime scene data, they determined that since the crime was committed near the victim's home, the attacker was either not afraid of being seen or was unaware that he might be noticed. This suggested that he either had a criminal record or was mentally unstable. A decision was made to check all persons with sexual deviations registered in clinics, as well as those previously convicted of similar offenses. A considerable amount of work was undertaken. Exactly 2 weeks after the discovery of Svetlana Menina's body, On the morning of September 10th, the entire staff of the Berdsk prosecutor's office and police were alerted again. This time, a body was found in a forest near the shore of the Ob Sea, not far from a hiking trail. 5 meters away, the body of a young woman was discovered. The scene differed little from the crime 2 weeks earlier. The young woman had been abused and killed. A brown bag with an inscription in English was found next to the body. Nothing else was discovered. In an effort to find even the slightest clue, the prosecutor's office asked colleagues in the regional capital for assistance. More than 100 Interior Forces soldiers combed the forest. Soon after, in the direction of District A, they found a blood-stained scarf, a vodka bottle, brown women's shoes, a black handbag, and several women's accessories scattered within a 200-meter radius. The connection between the two very similar crimes was obvious, and the conclusions were frightening. A madman was operating in the city. By this time, investigators had already discovered the perpetrator's third victim, not on the streets of Berdsk, but in an archive containing files of an unsolved murder of a 16-year-old student, Anastasia Fatkova. The crime had been committed almost a year earlier. The victim had been found in the same micro-district near house number 1. The attack had been bold. It took place in bushes 30 meters from a bus stop around 1 o'clock in the morning, when people were already on their way to work. The crime scene had very specific characteristics: abuse, suffocation, and the disappearance of all personal belongings without a trace. The investigations into these 3 crimes were combined into one criminal case. Local media informed residents about safety precautions because a murderer was on the loose in the town, and the characteristics of the latest victim were released in hopes that this would help identify the perpetrator. The entire population of Berdsk was in panic. Police officers and volunteers patrolled the streets at night. Parents did not allow their children, especially girls, to go out and often picked them up after school. The city administration developed a plan to increase security for the upcoming holiday, City Day. This phrase soon appeared in the criminal file. On September 11th, Vladimir Samokhvalov contacted the police and reported that his daughter had gone to rehearsal a few days earlier and had not returned. The man came to see the body that had been described on the radio and recognized her as his daughter. 22-year-old Tatyana Samokhvalova was studying wind instruments at the Novosibirsk Conservatory. A strange object found next to her body was a flute case. Samokhvalova was an independent woman who had a boyfriend with whom she sometimes stayed overnight, which is why her parents did not immediately notice her disappearance. Her father told investigators that his daughter had been well behaved, had no suspicious acquaintances, studied well, and played the flute. Investigators soon learned that the girl had left the cultural center where the rehearsal had taken place around 10 in the evening and shortly afterward, like her predecessors, had turned off a busy street onto a remote forest path. All 3 girls were found relatively close to each other, which led investigators to suspect that the killer lived nearby. Specialists helped create a psychological profile of the suspect and noted a very important detail. The perpetrator was attracted to shy, slender brunettes around 25 years old. This information was immediately passed to the media and recorded by the task force. Investigators checked numerous pawn shops and several hundred people. During this work, several other crimes were solved, but nothing related to the murderer was discovered. Soon, a strange man came under suspicion. For 4 months, from May to September, a certain clairvoyant who only saw women regularly rented an apartment at 104 Krasnaya Sibir Street. The suspect's name was Nikolai Voronov. During all 3 crimes, he had stayed in Berdsk and, thanks to his profession, easily gained women's trust. After learning about the police interest in him, The man himself came to the police station to clear himself of suspicion, which he managed to do. Soon, all leads were exhausted, and investigators could not find the real culprit. They concluded that the perpetrator had either left the city or learned about the manhunt and gone into hiding. Because of the long silence of the criminal, security measures in the city were gradually lifted, and Berdsk returned to its usual routine. However, the police understood that the perpetrator would reappear sooner or later. 2 years passed, and in December 2002, another violent crime occurred. On December 8, Valentina Mogilnaya contacted the police with terrible news. She had found the body of her daughter Yulia in her apartment at number 10 in the same residential area. The woman had been abused and killed by strangulation. In the apartment, there were dishes on the table, 2 stacks, and an opened bottle of alcohol. All fingerprints had been wiped from the utensils. However, under the table, there was an empty beer bottle that the perpetrator had forgotten. This bottle was sent for examination. In addition, the killer had locked the door, and the traces indicated that the victim knew her murderer. 6 months earlier, Yulia had a steady partner who happened to have a key. Vladimir Semyonov was immediately arrested as a suspect, but he denied any involvement in the crime. His fingerprints did not match those on the beer bottle. Nevertheless, Vladimir seemed to be hiding something. An investigation of the building entrance led detectives to a friend of Semyonov, who reported that the suspect had visited him on the day of the crime and said he had found his girlfriend dead. He did not go to the police because he believed that, as a previously convicted criminal, they would blame him anyway. Forensic experts determined that the woman had died on December 7th. However, Vladimir had an alibi for that day, and the biological evidence from the victim did not match him. This definitively cleared him, and the investigation stalled again. Soon, the fingerprint examination results arrived. The comparison led investigators to a man who had repeatedly been detained in a sobering upstation, Alexei Gaskov. Police officers went to his home and arrested him. At first, he denied involvement in the victim's death, but later claimed that he had killed her accidentally. His blood type also matched the biological traces from the crime scenes, which at first seemed to confirm that the serial killer had finally been found after more than 2 years of searching. Gaskov later signed confessions to all the crimes. At first, everything seemed to go according to investigators' expectations. The suspect showed the locations of the crimes, but later inconsistencies appeared. When it came to the details and methods of the murders, Gaskov began to hesitate and confuse his statements. He gave information that contradicted the forensic findings. Only genetic testing could determine whether Alexei was actually involved in all 4 crimes. A few weeks later, forensic experts delivered their conclusion. The biological evidence found on the victims did not belong to this suspect. No one could explain why Gaskov had incriminated himself, and investigators had to start their work again. All men who were even remotely suspicious were subjected to genetic testing. Gaskov, however, remained under observation because he seemed to know something about the crimes. He refused to answer questions about them, but enjoyed talking about himself. He told investigators that he had attended drama school and wanted to work in Moscow, but had not been accepted. Law enforcement authorities then sent a request to Moscow and learned that on November 8, 2002, while Gaskov had still been in the capital, a 23-year-old Peruvian student had been abused and killed near Moscow. The crime remained unsolved. Investigators from Moscow came to question Gaskov about this case as well. There were several similarities. First, Alexei lived 5 minutes from the young woman's dormitory. Second, he left immediately after she was found dead. After questioning, the suspect confessed to attacking the Peruvian woman, but even genetic testing did not confirm his involvement. Later, Alexei Gaskov was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in prison for abusing a young victim in another case. After a long time, the investigation took a new turn. One September night, a woman named Marina Vlasova, aged 30, came to the police station in Berdsk, claiming that someone had tried to abuse and kill her. She explained that she had been walking home late that evening when she met acquaintances accompanied by an unknown young man. He was slightly drunk, cheerful, and talkative, introduced himself as Misha, and offered to accompany her home. She agreed. After a brief conversation, the man dragged her into the bushes, threatened her, raped her, and then forced her to clean herself and leave with him. After some time, the assault was repeated, but the victim stopped resisting, which apparently distracted the attacker. Marina managed to free herself and escape. She ran to the road wearing only an undershirt, where a car stopped to help her. At first, Vlasova did not go to the police because she felt ashamed. But after hearing on television that a serial rapist was being sought, she decided to help investigators. From the man's acquaintances, investigators learned his name and address. The suspect was Mikhail, who lived at House 18 on Oktyabrskaya Street. Soon afterward, he was questioned at the station. Yudin did not deny being close to the woman, but claimed that everything had been consensual. Blood samples were taken from him for analysis, and he was released under supervision. However, he was immediately placed under covert surveillance. During a week of monitoring, investigators noticed nothing unusual. He did not try to escape. Investigators began to think they might once again be on the wrong track. A few weeks later, the laboratory results arrived, and they were sensational. All biological samples from the crimes matched Yudin's DNA. Police arrested him again and searched his apartment. Among various unidentified women's belongings, they found the watch belonging to the first victim. Investigators also discovered that Yudin owned an old shed. Inside it, they found the clothing of one victim and the flute of another. Investigators then began to examine Mikhail Yudin's past. Mikhail Alexandrovich Yudin was born on November 16, 1975, in the settlement of Nagorny in Altai Krai. He lived with his mother and brother. After finishing the 8th grade, he served in the army. After his discharge, he moved to the Novosibirsk region, where he worked in construction. From a young age, relatives and acquaintances noticed his reserved character and strange behavior, which changed only when he was drunk. Then, he became open, smiling, and sociable. In the summer of 1998, Yudin moved to Berdsk, where he met a woman, moved in with her, and worked on a construction team. The series of crimes had begun long before investigators started searching for the killer. On August 12, 1998, Yudin met a woman named Vera Nikolaeva near the fence of the Gigant plant, got to know her, and offered to escort her home. In a deserted area, he attacked, raped, and tried to kill her. Nikolaeva survived because workers arriving for the morning shift scared the attacker away. The woman reported the crime to the police, but the perpetrator was not caught at that time. A year later, in the summer of 1999, the killer committed his first murder. He dragged 16-year-old Anastasia Fatkova into the bushes near a bus stop and raped her for about an hour. When he heard passers-by approaching, he did not flee. Fatkova, still alive, tried to attract attention but failed. Yudin strangled her, took her watch and earrings, and left. He later gave the watch to his wife and the earrings to his mother. In the autumn of 1999, the construction crew where Yudin worked was transferred to Novosibirsk. On November 23rd, while drunk, he raped Olga Karpova in the entrance of her building and killed her. He took the woman's jacket and later gave it to his wife. A month after that attack, Yudin was arrested for attempted robbery and sentenced to 3 years in prison in February 2000. However, 3 months later he was released due to an amnesty. On July 14, 2000, Yudin was free again, and at the end of August he committed the crime that started the large manhunt. During the investigation, the killer confessed to 5 murders and 23 robberies and assaults. A forensic psychiatric examination determined that Mikhail Yudin was fully sane and aware of his actions. On June 7, 2004, the case was brought to court, and on December 2, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Polar Owl Penal Colony. His lawyer later appealed, but the Supreme Court of Russia upheld the verdict without changes. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.